think it's interesting because I think organizationally, influencer marketing falls into a lot of different places. And I think the reason that is it's a tactic. It's a way to reach your customers and deliver a message. And so you can use it in a lot of places. I think the common misperception of influencer marketing is it's an ad. It's a way to just get eyeballs, and where it is effective at reaching new audiences and leveraging existing brands of these influencers to build your own. But at the same time, there's a lot of applications of influencer marketing when we're talking about loyalty, when we're talking about education, getting people over that consideration phase actually into the conversion phase and buying your product. I guess if I go along the same example, a guy who sells a yoga ball chair that you see it and it looks goofy. I don't know if you guys have seen it before, but it's the yoga balls that have a little insert that's actually a chair on wheels. And like many of the products, it's being bought by yogis. And they took all of the, what you would think is a sterile photo of this ball sitting in real offices, and people realized, I can actually bring this into my office. And that was really impacted the consideration phase. So I think organizationally you see it everywhere, run by everything from PR teams to social media teams to brand marketing teams, but it really depends on the initial goal, and then can be applied and used strategically in a lot of different ways.
For me, influencers, how do I say this? They're not really the people I consider first. I think that's definitely a brand tactic, especially with something new, because it is a really, I think of influencer as semi-authentic, right? I guess then you could look at the subcategories of what type of influencer is actually presenting the product, and especially because if we're being really honest, we're starting to see the ROIs actually kind of not looking as great as we thought they looked last year. If you see the reports from Wall Street Journal and New York Times, I don't know if anyone saw how really interesting article that I read last weekend in the New York Times about how fashion bloggers are ruining Fashion Week. So we're starting to see somewhat of because you have to ask yourself, and this isn't me dissing influencers at all, but you have to ask yourself, what are they actually experts in, right? Because I think there's that and I think definitely in the brand phase that you guys talk about, I mean, a lot of that job is actually finding out those experts that could do it. I mean, I think the area of the influencer that maybe isn't actually passionate, that might have a large reach, is to me a lot less attractive than someone with 1,000 people but really knows fucking everything about table water. Right, you know what I mean? I'm sorry, that title wasn't allowed to swear. Because I swear a lot, so sorry, apologise. So for me, in my use of it, I mean, there are some cases where I would use it early on, but it's almost like in the final stages of conversion for me. It's kind of like that authenticity. It's almost like the final thumbs up. That's how I would use it. I wouldn't use it personally to start a conversation. I'd use it to close one.
Yeah, I mean,
about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And our brand is built on authenticity. I think to answer the original question, how do you look at a campaign? I think a little academic, it's already surfaced with you guys. We do this sort of GHOST model of goals, objectives, strategies, tactics. And so when we're trying to identify a problem or an opportunity, we start at the top and say, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Somehow sort of frame that with a target audience and some metrics, how we know we're going to succeed or fail. And then if influencers become a tactic that would serve that, then we would go and engage an influencer. It's sort of a nebulous topic, I guess, or descriptor, because when I look at influencer and I look at social media, I also just go back to the original word of mouth marketing. It's all, for me, all under the same umbrella, which is somebody who, for whatever reason, has discovered you and likes you so much that they're going to tell somebody else about you, and it doesn't get more powerful than that. And I think influencer marketing is really maybe a scalable version of that, or maybe a systematic version of that. It can definitely get to the level of being contrived and sponsored to the point where it actually is counterproductive, and we've all seen the inauthentic partnerships out there that for us, we run from. So when I mention a guy like Mark Healy, Mark Healy's a high-profile sponsored athlete. He came to us. He said, look, I only wear your brand. I only wear Olekai, and let's work together. Let's figure out how this. And for us, that's the first signal, which is somebody coming to us saying, you fit my closet, you fit in my lifestyle. And if it's anything other than that, we won't even really talk to them because we just know it's not worth it. Even if there's somebody that's quite high profile and we would benefit from their audience, it can be quickly counterproductive and inauthentic. So
It's kind of like what Nike or Adidas have been doing for years, right? They do the top level athletes, kind of those massive $1 million deals. But if you're anyone with any type of athletic ability that plays professionally, they're going to send product to you because they want to wear them. And the athlete's going to choose whether I want to wear it or not. And I think it's kind of, but I guess now we switch out athletes to average people becoming experts in their own field. Do you know what I mean? So, I don't know, it's nothing too new, it's just...
old things are new again. It kind of reminds me about how
product seeding.
native advertising is really just advertorial, and perhaps influencer marketing is another form of celebrity endorsement that we've seen for many years.
But the most effective ones are the ones where I think the ones that you just know where people just wear Nike because they want to wear Nike. Or they want to wear Adidas because they want to wear Adidas. And they'll probably wear it whether they're getting free shoes or not.
I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. It goes back to the brand goals, So, in the example that I initially gave with AquaTrue, their goal was to sell as many, water filtration systems as they could before they launched. That was what their goal was. They weren't, awareness wasn't their key thing. They were trying to actually convert right out of the gate. So, with that particular case, what we did was to find influencers that were very passionate, that were experts in that particular green, eco-friendly space, and then used them as brand, essentially as an ancillary sales team, where they, instead of getting a fee up front, which many influencers do, they actually got a percentage of the sales. So they ended up developing email marketing campaigns and newsletter programs with their audience. And they actually, one of the guys actually went to UCLA, and he actually filmed the water filtration system actually being tested. Like, he went far and above and beyond. So a lot of people got really creative. Another woman took Coca-Cola and put it through the purifying system so that she could demonstrate that it came out water on the other side. So, one of the things I think with the takeaway, there's obviously the standard tactics, right? I mean, email and video. But one of the things that I've learned through working with the different influencers that are really good at what they do is that they become part of the creative process, and that they bring ideas themselves, because they really truly are not only passionate about the category that they're experts and influencers in, but they really understand their following. They really understand what's going to get their followers to respond. And the programs that we've developed, that we've been very successful, there's sort of a harmony between the brand and the influencer. It's really a relationship where the brand has to be willing to give up a little bit of control. We started to talk about this idea of being unauthentic. I think a lot of times the material becomes unauthentic from a brand standpoint when they get so fear-based and you get so scared of, oh my God, well, what if something bad is going to be said about my brand, that you're trying to actually control the message. That's when it becomes contrived. But when you actually partner with the influencer in whatever vehicle, whether it's email or video or ads or Facebook posts or whatever you creatively come up together from a campaign perspective, and allow them to be part of that creative process, which is one of the reasons why they're influencers, is because most of them really love the creative process. That's when you get the magic.
It seems like a brand would only be able to engage with so many influencers. Could you talk about scale and, what you're talking about of co-creating and kind of partnering? It seems like you'd only be able to do that to so much extent, and you'd have to pick one influencer with a large audience as opposed to many with a smaller niche audience.
Yeah, that's a good a good point. You know, I think, and I think Seb is the one that said it earlier, for us, we've had the most success, and not necessarily influencers that have huge reach, but that are super passionate about a smaller group of people, and that can be so much more powerful than going out to somebody that maybe has like 2 million followers, but it's about a numbers game to them. It's not necessarily about, at this point, about the passion for and being an expert in their cause.
Those influencers then are promoting the brand in whatever way they want in many cases, and there's this
I mean, I think you
tangential
need to put
relationship.
guardrails around it, you know, and that's what we've always tried to work with our brands, because you don't want to set people and have it turn into the Wild West. Like, you want it to be, you want the message from a brand perspective to be obviously consistent. And then that's where, you know, we try to work with them so that they really understand who the target audience is. We go through the brand strategy with them. We go through and provide them bullet points of what, from a brand perspective, our key messages are, and obviously allow the brand to work with them. And most influencers will, a lot of times, show you content and share it with you before they push it out to the world.
I'd love to see the fine print on those contracts. I bet lawyers have a field day with this stuff. Andrew, in your business, you're cultivating photos from consumers and applying it to the brand use. How do they use those photos in practicality? Is it across different social channels, or what's really happening in the Pixley business, if you want to talk through it?
Really everywhere that a brand interacts with the customer, there's the opportunity, and we help brands make that a much more authentic experience. And the easiest way to do that is through real customers. And I think the underlying philosophy of Pixley, but also, you know, a lot of trends in marketing is a message no longer needs to come from the brand itself. And quite frankly, it's often a much stronger message, but it doesn't. And it's word of mouth. And today, you know, you go back 30, 40 years, word of mouth was what? Maybe 20, you talk to 20 or 30 people a day. Today, every single consumer has the opportunity to be a media company, and they have a giant megaphone in their pocket. And so I think that the concept of micro-influencers or influencers, it really is just relationships. And the best way to, you know, perform influencer marketing, but also just develop your brand is through these relationships. And when you're talking specifically influencers, it can't be a transactional relationship. It's not, I'm paying you for your audience, and it really is about going deeper. And one of the ways to scale that is actually, before you start that process, really making sure you're picking the right influencers. And because their brand is really important, and it's going to be a really poor use of resources if you have to alter their brand to make it successful for you.
That's a great point, that they are brands unto themselves.
And that's important, and you want that. That's the value in influencers. Right. It's not just, it's their brand, it's their expertise. And so, you know, LeBron James would be an absolutely horrible influencer for a gluten-free flour. You know, and they reach a lot of people, and honestly, people that, you know, and people that would buy the flour, but the depth to that relationship and his brand is not benefiting you.
Although Shaq is like pushing everything at the moment. You know, it's like he's like car insurance, tampons, like he's like everything. I'm like, it's amazing. Yeah, money talks, right?
Well, there's a timeline element to that, because I think initially Shaq, LeBron, Kanye, these guys all represent a huge scale that is really mouthwatering for, you know, people like me, anyways, because that scale is there. However, over time, if they are directly related to what you're doing, they form a partnership, they get involved in a creative process, they start to become part of your company or your brand. For us is really where it becomes very powerful, because anybody can go out and, you know, with a budget and buy the eyeballs. You know, it's just a matter of negotiating a good price on those is probably the, you know, success or failure there. But over time, Kanye will be a great example with Yeezy and Adidas. Will it just be, you know, some PR stunt at the beginning to, you know, create a bunch of influence initially with his community and following, or will it become a Jordan where he actually becomes part of the DNA of the company and vice versa, and it's leveraged over time? So from a footwear perspective, that's definitely the highest profile example of that.
Yeah, I mean, no one's talked about footwear like Kanye's had that conversation for like 4 years. And remember, these sneakers are like, these aren't cheap sneakers. These aren't like obtainable. Even if you do have the money, then you've got to find it there. You know, so you're not talking about like a product that's really out there. It is, but it's kind of hard to find, and yet he's owned, since the Louis Vuitton sneaker deal, he's owned the sneaker conversation for 4 years. And why is that? Because Kanye really, really likes sneakers. You know what I mean? Like he really likes shoes.
That's authentic.
I think that the thing we also have to remember, because these people are influencers and really do care and foster their own brands, is this is much more successful when they need the brands as much as you need them. And so they need content. They need to actually continue to deliver thought leadership. And if you really believe in the product you're selling and the value you're providing your customers, then you're actually giving them access to thought leadership. The gluten-free example. If you make a great product that tastes good and is easy to cook with, you're actually helping and benefiting the influencers that are going to go create the recipes and talk about how to use this product. So when you do that correctly, Kanye is a good example. There's a lot of places where he would be a horrible brand ambassador. When it comes to shoes, that's his passion. He wants to deliver a great experience. So it works.
And his first one was Louis Vuitton. I mean, like, no one's behind the Kanye West K-Swiss sneakers, right? He's like matched himself with, you know, who's gone from Louis Vuitton to Nike to Adidas? I mean, he couldn't be any more matching his personality and what he is to the level of brand is. And I think that's a huge thing for brands, is to know, especially when you're launching, is you have to match your brand to the sort of level that you are as your influencer to what you are. It's kind of why Shaq Insurance works in a strange way, right? Shaq Insurance works because everybody needs car insurance and everyone knows who Shaq is. So there's like an idea that if you are a grower, I think if you're a young brand, then you're okay if you have a young influencer with that like very targeted fan base. You don't need to be a brand new brand and go, oh shit, I gotta like spend 250,000 on whoever, right? You know what I mean? Like you don't need that. It's just about matching, like everyone said, partnering.
Yeah,
Right?
big celebrities and those kinds of endorsements, that's at a whole different scale than I think many of the people watching this are going to be working at. I mean, if we could just bring it back down to the tactical level of like YouTube stars and Instagram followers, like let's talk about the economics of that. Like what are brands spending? What are influencers earning? What do those deals look like? Do they really do performance deals? Or is it just kind of cash for their time? Like, could you talk a little bit about what the business?
Yeah, there's a real huge wide range, I think, in terms of the economics of it. So there are quite a few influencers that I've worked with that are willing to take some sort of percentage back-end deal. And those are typically influencers that have a smaller, that aren't the 2 million plus followers, but have a really, really good understanding of their followers, and their followers really, truly, passionately are involved. So in that case, they know that when they recommend something, that they're going to get people to get on board with whatever they're saying. And then, there are people that the range kind of, there's a huge, huge range. So, you can really build whatever your budget is. You really can build an influencer program regardless of how large or small your budget is. What's going to really depend is, how many eyeballs, how many touch points, how many interactions. I mean, that's all sort of part of it. And obviously, influencers that are younger are going to be much more willing to partner and flexible, which is for a young brand, that's one of the benefits, that if you can get somebody out of the gate that's a young, hungry influencer that's really passionate about what they're doing and is creative and interesting, that does have a following, a lot of times you'll be able to get a lot more partnership out of them than some of the larger influencers that already have a huge established brand themselves, because they're getting a lot of brands coming to them. So, it's going to be harder to partner.
Okay. I would also like to know from you guys, if you've kind of experienced this, where the performance metrics come down, right? Like at the end of the day, the marketing team, we talked about objectives at the outset, but how are we measuring performance on this stuff? Any thoughts on that in your view?
I think I look at it two ways. I think if it's purely about reach, to me, I just look at it the same way I would look at a traditional print ad or an online buy. And it's, a CPM essentially. And just another tactic
And that's
to get
easily
your message
measured,
out.
right?
Yeah, you know how those
Influencer world.
in your world, you know what those costs are, and you negotiate against that. So if I'm going to spend 10 grand on an ad, I'll spend appropriate amount to reach that number of eyeballs through an influencer network or something like that. I don't do that. I rarely do that because of the authenticity conversation. It's just not our model. For us, the other way I look at it is you're coming in and you're part of our organization, almost as close to a full-time employee as we could get. And this gets a little soft, but it's the way that it works for us is if you're an artist, I will go out and I'll commission work, on our behalf so you can continue to do your trade. So we work with muralists right now, and we're doing murals all over the country and basically funding, their passion and their love. And in turn, they're advocating what we're doing. So it's really not a pay for play as much. It is, but it really directly isn't. It's more of you scratch, my back, I'll scratch yours. And, we get what we want out of it, which is a very authentic, sort of loyal community following us and excited about us. And then you guys get what you want, which is, whatever you're passionate about will help support. So that model to me really, really works.
I mean, for me, I'm being honest, it's still really hard to track this stuff. It's like that age-old saying, right? 50% of my marketing's working, I just don't know which 50%. I think it's just, I think there's in terms of what all of us do, there's a kind of a gut feeling in us of when something's working. I mean, there are metrics, and I can tell when you've opened an email, and I can tell when you've clicked through, and I can tell you've been on a page for 17 seconds, and I can tell all these amazing things, but I never be able to tell if you actually go home and think about my stuff. I'll know if you buy it. Well, but I won't also really know if it's because of anything I've done that you're buying it. It's still one of those things that's just up to the gods, in my opinion. I mean,
That's it. So obviously the traditional advertising metrics. The other big piece is every marketer needs more content. There's just too many channels. Traditional content generation is really slow and it's expensive. So I think that what you're doing in partnering with these influencers is generating some really highly engaging and powerful content. So another way to look at the value and track the performance is, one, reduce costs when you actually then take this content and use it on other channels, use it on your website, use it in email, and then you actually are able to take the layer of content metrics and start measuring the value of your influencer marketing against content marketing and against the other ways you're generating creative and distributing it to channels way beyond social.
Did you want to add to that, Cynthia?
Yeah, in terms of measurement, some of the things, I mean, I agree with Seb that it is really hard to track, but there are things that you can do to try to help you. One of the things that we've done is obviously provide influencers individual, unique, offer codes, and we've also developed, separate landing pages for them so that we can track their customers' journey to be able to get at least a gauge on conversion rates for the different influencers, so you can kind of know who to invest more in and who not to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up the attribution, modeling kind of conversation of marketing in general. It's all part of it.
I think
it's going to apply to some ultimate conversion.
I think what Andrew said actually was hugely important. The whole thing about how content is, everyone needs more content than we can possibly make in the short amount of time and budgets we have. To me, the value is if I can reuse the stuff I've already made across emails and everything. While I might not be able to tell my conversion end rate, hey, you've really helped me in the short term of being able to not have to go out and make and reuse.
That's a great point.
If I can reuse what I've got, great, you just saving me money and saving me a bunch of time.
I'd like to flip it to you guys for some questions in a few minutes, but think of some smart questions for our esteemed panel here. But before we do, I wanted to just talk about how brands engage with influencers and that sort of the approach. How do you determine the market sort of the brand influencer fit? How does that process play out? And to that end, do MCNs and other kind of third parties have a role in bringing those parties together? What does that bring up for you guys?
I can start this. From a brand's perspective, especially a brand, consumer product brand like ours, knowing yourself and knowing your DNA, it starts with that. So we know, sort of what our brand ethos are, and then we, go out to seek those that kind of emulate that.
Do they seek you as well?
Absolutely.
Or,
Yeah.
It goes both.
Actually,
that conversation goes both ways.
That's the best. Like I was saying with Healy, when they come to us and say, "I just love what you guys are doing. I'm already a fan, and how can I help?" That is absolutely
That's ideal,
way.
right?
Yeah. And I would say one point that I would make to influencers, and would love to know how people are handling this. In a formalized way, it's relatively new. It's almost like kind of your first pass at the influencer model. What I'm seeing is folks that we worked with 5 years ago have now realized they can build a career out of this. It's some sort of sustainable thing, and they're starting to market themselves and promoting other brands and even competitor brands. And it's becoming an issue for us where it's like, okay, you've sort of gone out there and clearly marked yourself with several other brands, and that's just less appealing now, right? Because you're associated with Keen, you're associated with whoever, Reeve, and we just don't water a message down like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know how others handle that, but for me that's a big challenge with some really great influencers in our space that at this point are kind of off the table because it's, in my opinion, kind of tainted their value to us.
Well, you have a thought on exclusivity and that?
It's one of the things that when we negotiate deals with influencers for the brands that we work with, one of the things that we do in the contracts is to always is to ensure that whatever space that brand is in, that they are only going to be promoting our brand within the extended period of that particular campaign. Because it's critical for them to be you can't cannibalize it.
It's just a fair thing to do.
Yeah,
it's
fair.
not rocket science. I'd say if you're talking about like how if you're a starting out influencer, how to align yourself with, I would say reach out to brands and ask for free stuff. I think that's always the best way. Like when I always encourage people to reach out to the brands and like you said, I think it's really important when they come to us rather than us go to them. Because then I'm kind of like, all right, you've taken the time to do the email, and if you actually care about it, cool, I'll give you a shot. But the second the brands reach out, like dollar signs, and it just becomes like then it's like, oh, talk to my attorney.
Right.
It just becomes a long-winded thing, and you're just like bored of it.
That's it. The other really important thing is for a lot of lifestyle brands like Olakai, you actually have a lot of influencers out there already. And being able to actually go find them. And people that are embodying the brand, not because they reached out to you or you reached out to them, but simply because it's a great product. So I know with a lot of the more formal partnerships, you're trying to emulate that behavior, but it's oftentimes, if you're doing your job right and providing a good experience, a lot of it's already out there. So that's important as well.
What do you guys think? What have we left out here that you'd like to ask our panel? Please.
I have two questions, and if I can only choose one, I'll just blend them together. So we talked a lot about relationship building versus conversion numbers. I get approached by a lot of brands and every single one, and digital marketers, and the first question is always, how many eyeballs on your website? What are your social numbers? And it doesn't seem to be that I don't meet too many, or any really, that are thinking about quality over scale. So my question really is, how can an influencer educate a brand?
And I'll repeat that for the at-home audience.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. How can the influencer educate a brand relative to quality versus scale and
Relationship building.
relationship building versus analytics and measurement?
Well, I'll do a holiday gift guide, let's say, and everyone wants to know, so how many conversions did this get? Now, obviously, unless I have a landing page or a code from them, I can't tell them that. I can see how many people visited, but I try to tell them that it's not necessarily for that, to sell X number of widgets. It's really about relationship building.
I have a client right now that is a very direct marketing oriented client, so they're predisposed to those performance metrics, and we're talking about display, print advertising, and influencer marketing, and it's just, there's a bit of a disconnect. So what about you guys? Anything come up for you relative to the influencer helping the brand understand their audience at a more meaningful level, whether performance or relationship?
I can relate to that, but it's not going to answer it directly. It's when we first went to market, it's, we're expensive for our category and price point, and buyers would always say, give me a discount or work with me on this sort of thing. And we would just sort of walk out of the room and say, you don't get it, not necessarily in that word, but it was kind of a strength position, which is one of, if you're buying us on price, you're not buying us for the right reason. So if your quality, if that's what you represent, and somebody's buying you for eyeballs, they're buying you for the wrong reason. And somehow you need to get them to understand what your value proposition is. And sometimes it's just not a right fit. Like for us, Dick's Sporting Goods wasn't a right fit. So we walked away from them and said, you guys don't get us. We'll stick to people that sort of value what we bring, a premium, unique, product to the table. We turned down a lot of money to make that decision, but in the long road, it made a lot of sense for us. So.
Good answer, Cynthia.
I think it's a great answer. So something very tactical that I've seen that that has helped me, because I get the influencers, the value in telling an authentic story and in quality. And you're right, a lot of times brands and the marketing team, they want the numbers. So, how do you help translate the value? And some of the influencers that I've talked to that have sort of developed marketing packages for themselves and, really being able to showcase parts of their website, testimonials from the people that are in their community, and, to really be able to help market themselves and the value to kind of demonstrate it. That's actually been very helpful, so that you can actually have real examples to be able to communicate effectively. Like when you say it's about the value and the quality, to actually demonstrate what you're talking about in like a PowerPoint or some sort of snazzy little sell sheet type package. It can be very, very impactful to marketing folks.
Do we have another question from the audience, sir?
Just in context, what was old is new. I'm an ex-Procter & Gamble CPG guy, but 14 years in tech. And how often, from let's say agency talking to your clients, that you have to reframe the conversation from tactical, where people come in and say, I want to do this, versus let's go back and do Ghost for a second, and frame the marketing model and kind of reposition and say, is this, first of all, the right thing to do, versus taking the order to say, let's kind of reframe this.
You want to restate the question and then answer it? Go ahead, Cynthia.
It's hard to put a percentage on it, but I would say a large number of folks want to go right to the tactics. I think once you do say, hold up, let's go back there, and you kind of go back to the goals and objectives and strategies, people can see the value in it and why. But most of the time, people's tendencies, strategy is one of those things. It's this very ominous, elusive kind of thing. Like, what is strategy? People use it in different ways. So a lot of times, people, when they talk strategy, they go right to tactics. So it is really important, whether you're the head of the marketing department or you're an agency, just to really remind your team to kind of start with the goals and the objectives, because ultimately the tactics is just the vehicle in which you're telling your story, and the content, it's only as good as your strategy is. So, ultimately that's where it starts. So I would say most of the time you have to remind people.
Thank you. That's about framing strategy versus tactics and how often we have to revisit that. I think if you start with a good strategy, the tactics flow from that, but you do have to keep the conversation coming back to that. That's a great question. We have time for one or two more right back here.
So I represent the brand perspective, and I'm curious about timing relative to budget and potential ROI. I mean, you guys discussed it's hard to measure the exact impact of what you're getting from the influencer strategy, but if you're leading up to a product launch and budget is a key concern for your marketing dollars, what do you think has more effect? Leading the conversation before you launch that product, kind of like what you talked about with AquaTrip, or following into that launch and supporting it with the influencers trying to
So
drive
the
sales?
question is about timing as related to campaign budgets, and do you kind of lead into a launch or do you trail a launch? Go ahead.
I think I'd never do anything before. I mean, my audience is goldfish. Like, if they don't have anything to buy right now, I'm not going to do that whole, I mean, you know, going back to also the previous question, I mean, a lot of that is agency speak, which I just can't listen to a lot of the time, because we can talk about strategy and 2 months up front, 3 months and launch dates and all this stuff, but you're talking about a millennial audience that want to get it now, and if they don't want it now, they ain't going to get it. So I wouldn't, that whole build-up for launches and stuff, unless you're dealing with a big product and you have a heck of a lot of money, I want my impact to be short, sweet, on the point, and I want conversion from conversation. I don't want to be like, no one's excited about anything that much anymore, that they're going to be talking about it for longer than a day, period.
Let's try to get 2 more questions in, right here.
Okay, I'm a full-time music producer and recording studio owner, but I'm slowly moving towards artist management. So I represent a lot of singers, artists that do all kinds of gigs. So for example, I have an artist that's playing a festival with like 5K audience. I want to collaborate with a brand. So how do I approach them into, I don't know, collaborations or promotions? You know?
How does an artist representative approach brands? That's all you said.
Real quick, content, that's it. That's your easiest way in. Just go for the content. Go to a brand that's got money that's trying to make content, and like use your band that day to say, hey, bring a camera crew and we can talk about vodka or something, but can you get me content in return? I'm the band's manager. I want my band seen on camera. Can we get a content check?
It's 1 minute.
It's color cooling.
I'd say another.
Okay, Jennifer, last question right here.
Just real quick,
just-
one
yeah.
more quick one on that is, you guys represent something that's really desirable to us, which is a tour, potentially, which is a national audience, but
Yeah.
in a local capacity.
Yeah.
So we've worked with artists in that way, and it's really desirable because there's not, outside of buying a Springer van and getting some mobile marketing team.
It's cheap.
Yeah, it's cheap, and you guys are already going to be doing that. So that's a big point.
Jennifer gets the last question.
I'm curious to hear the vetting process for influencers.
The vetting process for
Any tools
influencers.
you use specifically?
Tools, tactics.
I use Sumo quite a bit. I don't know how many other people do, but I think it's an amazing tool because it has a few different things, but you can, see in relationship to your brand what the topics, the top topics are as far as content. There's a whole thing where you can look at influencers and it gives you the numbers of them, but it also kind of gives you some snippets, so you can really kind of get a really good, quick, broad overview in a short period of time, which I think is really helpful.
You guys have been terrific. Cynthia, Andrew, Seth, Carrie.